Today is Tuesday, June 25th, 2024. This is Stephen Fagin, curator of the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. And this interview is part of our oral history project. And at the beginning, sir, I'll just ask you to give us your full name, date and place of birth, and a little bit about yourself.
I'm Alex Harris. I was born in Missouri in 2009, and I recently started researching the Kennedy assassination. I'm 14, and I started my research at, I believe, the age of 11.
Wow.
In the 5th grade.
That's amazing. Let's go back. I mean, how did you first become aware of the assassination as a subject of interest? I do not remember when I came to learn of it as something that happened, but when I gained my interest of it was sometime during when I was in the 5th grade. I watched the Zapruder film for the first time. I believe it was the MPI version that there is out there, and I watched it, and my first impression was, well, obviously it's very graphic, but I instantly thought, that can't be it. So I started doing a little bit more research into what else is there. I eventually found the Orville Nix film and the Marie Muchmore film, and that's kind of what, it kind of snowballed from there. So you were drawn from the very beginning to the photographic evidence?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. All starting with the Zapruder film.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see it on YouTube, or you mentioned it was the MPI version? Was it part of Image of an Assassination, or was it on YouTube?
It was on YouTube.
It's interesting how so many young people become familiar with the nuances of this subject just from exploring the internet.
Yeah.
Anyone in your family, maybe grandparents, have first-hand memories of the assassination?
Yes, but not. They weren't close to it, I'll say that. My great-grandmother, who is still alive, was alive during the shooting. I believe she was in her early 20s, and she passed along quite a bit of her papers along to me that she had related to it. But those wouldn't be anything that other people don't have. Mainly were from the Kansas City Star, which is, I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. She has a lot of newspapers like that and other things that were published in the Kansas City Star related to the assassination. But other than that, not really.
So, you see the Zapruder film and it sparks an interest. What would you say it is about the subject matter itself? I mean, this is something that happened 60 years ago. Why does that matter to you at age 14?
Well, that's a question. I'm not really sure how to answer that. It's just interesting to me the impact it had, and that's the best answer I can give. Okay.
Do you like President Kennedy as a person?
As a person, yes. I believe he was one of the best presidents we've ever had. He had a lot of good plans for America and was doing some great things during his presidency, and I believe that's partly why he was assassinated, is that those particular things were in the interest of other political figures.
There are those who are interested in this subject and don't really do any research. We call those people enthusiasts. They're interested, but they don't go out and do original research. But you are a researcher.
Yes.
How did you make that determination to, instead of just being an enthusiast who watches videos on YouTube, how did you go to become an actual researcher?
Well, part of it is, and especially nowadays when anybody can say anything,
from the start, I wanted to have a good first-hand account of, especially the photographic evidence, because people can say anything, and it's good to have at least solid proof of something than to, say, oh, this got caught on film and we don't have that film and no one else knows it exists. It's just very good to have that solid evidence.
So where did you go from there? Having seen Zapruder, Nix, much more online, how does one get started this day and age exploring this very, very complicated topic?
From there, I'm pretty sure I got interested in how all of it lined up, because that's part of what my research even now deals with, is people especially don't realize exactly how some of these photographs and films, how close they are together. And I'm actually working on a project right now which I'm synchronizing all of those films, to give people a perspective about just how close together these films are.
How do they speak to you? What conclusions have you been able to draw from studying these?
Several things. I can't think of one thing in particular. I can't exactly think of one thing in particular.
Okay. When you look at the Zapruder film, do you feel watching that play out that there's more to the story than one man firing 3 shots from this building?
That is, yes, that's what I generally get from it.
Okay. So, what do you think happened?
Personally, I think there was at least 1 shot fired from the 6th floor window. I don't think Oswald did it. As for other shooters, I'm not really sure, because a lot of the evidence contradicts each other. But all I know for sure is that there was at least 1 shot fired from the 6th floor window.
Now, why not by Oswald? What makes you think that?
Well, the sheer fact that he was on the 2nd floor within a minute after the shooting and was clearly not out of breath or and every single person I've talked to about just how quickly he was down on the 2nd floor says, I don't know a single person that can run that fast and not be out of breath. And clearly his actions that day indicate that he was, especially after the assassination, indicate that he was somewhat confused about what was going on and didn't exactly realize that he was being, well, framed until he got to the Texas Theater.
Beyond watching the films online and looking at the photographs, what books have you read that stand out in your mind as titles you would recommend to somebody about the assassination?
Well, specifically the photographic evidence, I'd say Richard Track's Pictures of the Pain is an amazing resource. One thing I'll say about that is I believe he could have gone into a lot more detail than he did. But, of course, that's something that anyone can do. With time, we know more and more about things.
Pictures of the Pain is like 600 pages long, but he could have gone into more detail, but
yeah.
He went into a lot of detail just
and
as it was.
I'm writing my own book, it's similar in layout to that, but I'll be going into as much depth as I can about not even just, the films in Dealey Plaza, but as much film as I can get related to the assassination, including there's some films that I, getting into the case, didn't know about until about a year in, and that most people never hear about.
Can you give me an example?
Like James Patrick Doyle Jr. was, and you guys have the John Martin film in New Orleans. James Doyle was a second amateur cameraman that was there for Oswald in New Orleans. His story is really interesting because I believe it was the FBI that confiscated that film within a few days of the assassination, and when it was and they actually refused to return the film to him until the late 70s. And when the film was eventually returned, it was, I believe, 1/7 of the original length.
So what have you been able to determine from that? What was on the film that the government did not want to return to him?
That's not for me to say. But I do know that out of the fraction that was returned to him, we have a fraction of that. We have about half of that. For whatever reason, the people that own the original film now will not release it.
So getting interested in this, you said the 5th grade, right?
Yes.
What did your friends make of this? It's not necessarily an area of interest for elementary school students.
I mean, people, my close friends thought, they thought it was interesting what I was doing, but they were nowhere near as interested as me. I've definitely gotten some weird looks, and but it's, no one is my age is near as interested as me. No one that I know. And my teachers are blown away by what I know, especially in history class. But that's, yeah.
Have you had a chance to present in school, share anything?
Yeah. I actually, I have slides of the Spruder film that I've shown to a lot of people, and that they're particularly high quality. And that's something I pull out all the time to show people I have, because basically nobody has stuff like that.
What about your family, your parents? Are they concerned that you're so interested in the Kennedy assassination?
Concerned in the usual use of that word, I'd say no. They're certainly surprised, I'd say, and they try and support it, but I don't think they're not all too interested either. But yeah, they certainly, they were surprised.
That's interesting. So they don't have any kind of a passing interest in this subject at all?
I mean, my father, really the closest interest that he had was he'd drive through Dealey Plaza all the time and show my mother, where Kennedy had been assassinated. But that's the most he ever got into it.
Okay. That's interesting. I asked because I was interested in the assassination when I was your age, but my interest really developed because my mom was interested in it. So I picked that up from her. It's so fascinating that you found this completely on your own and made this a subject that you're just very passionate about. And and that's extremely commendable because 60 years on, it's somewhat challenging to get young people interested in this subject. Have you been successful in getting any of your friends or peers to read a book about this or explore stuff online?
I certainly advocate for younger people to start doing research. I don't think I've been too successful, but I advocate for it all the time. I don't believe I've been very successful, no.
You have presented at is it the Lancer Conference?
Yes.
Let's talk about that. First of all, how did you get in touch with those folks? Tell me about that story.
Well, the person that runs the Lantern Conference, who is here with us today, contacted me and asked me if I was the person to run the YouTube channel that I own. I obviously told him yes, and from there it kind of we talked about the specific interests we have in the photographic evidence, and he eventually told me that he runs the Lantern Conference. And I told him I'd be interested in presenting there, and of course he said I could, and of course this is all back in August of last year, and at first my plan was to do it virtually because I did not know I was going to be coming down here, but things very quickly changed, and I ended up going to live with my father, who lives in Fort Worth. So I was able to do my presentation in person, which happened to be on the Dallas Cinema Associates film.
Let's talk about the Dallas Cinema Associates film. I'm fascinated by that film as well. We had the chance to interview
Bryant Boren. Yes,
and George
I talked to his daughter yesterday.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to be able to speak with people like that. She actually wasn't really interested in. She wanted to meet me, which was surprising. She had seen that I talked about her father in my presentation at the Lantern Conference, and desperately wanted to meet with me and see what all I knew about her father. And I'll be keeping in contact with her.
Tell me about your paper. What did you talk about?
In my presentation, the main goal of it was to educate people on the cameramen of the DCA film, because I've seen not enough research towards it. It doesn't seem like people care enough about it. So basically what I did is I was able to obtain a copy of the whole DCA film from the people that run the Lantern Conference, and I used a process that I've never heard anyone use before that is particularly... It's useful in determining who took what film, because within the DCA film there's a number of shots that we know we've already identified who took them. The process I used was, on the outside of almost every single film frame there is what I like to call an edge print, or edge markings. It's a pattern of the black around the images within the film, and the cameras that were used for the DCA film, they had the edge markings were specific to the camera, which means that any one scene can be compared with another, and you can use the edge markings on that scene that you have identified and know that the other scene with the exact same edge markings was taken by at least the same camera.
Wow. Okay. So what conclusions did you draw?
I was able to figure out... I was able to identify a lot of footage that people hadn't identified before. There's footage in the DCA film of the limousine rushing to Parkland Hospital, and I was able to say who exactly that came from. Before I did my research, it wasn't exactly very clear, because there was two people who joined the DCA film that had filmed footage on the Stemmons Freeway, and I was able to narrow it down to who exactly did it.
I think it's wonderful that you are helping to identify some of these people so that we know who shot what that day.
Yeah.
What would you say to the general person who's maybe not interested in the assassination? What would you say the benefit of identifying the photographers is for us today?
Well, especially in cases of if a photo shows something in particular that is of interest to other researchers, it's a very big benefit to ask the photographer or their family, why did they take this at this specific time, and what were they thinking when they took the shot?
Besides Bryant Boring's daughter, have you been able to contact any of the other DCA family members?
I talked to the son of John Martin Jr., who was the only DCA cameraman in Dealey Plaza. He unfortunately told me that they could not find his original film. I presented the information to him that I'd read in Pictures of the Pain, which said that the original film was supposed to be in a safety deposit box in Dallas, and the key was supposed to be handed down to one of the sons. He immediately responded he didn't know there was a safety deposit box. The only thing that I believe they have from that the DCA film, at least the Martin family, is the camera that John Martin Jr. used. And I've unfortunately lost contact with him. I believe too many people have tried to speak with him.
Yeah. What do people, when you talk to researchers or family members or things like that, and people find out how old you are, how do they respond to that?
They're usually very surprised at first, and they compliment me, and usually, but after it settles down, it's usually they usually ask me exactly how I got into the case, and from there it usually goes to what all I know, and they're usually very surprised because the only other researcher I know that is around my age is 13, and I talk to him all the time, and he is surprised with my knowledge.
Are there a lot of teenage researchers besides the two of you?
I'd say not that I know of. I'm only aware of me and another researcher.
This is one of those subjects that, it's been passed down through generations. The first wave of critical researchers in the 60s and in the 70s. There's fewer and fewer today, it seems like, because people who weren't alive in 1963 don't have an emotional connection to the subject, which is what fuels so much of the passionate research in this case.
Yeah.
How do you think, we're here, just a little past the 60th anniversary, where do you think we'll be at the 75th anniversary or the 100th anniversary? Do you think this is still going to be a topic that people are actively researching and looking into, gathering evidence about?
I certainly think there'll be a lot less people by then doing research into the case, but I believe it's an important enough topic that there'll be at least a few people doing research, I hope. I don't think that research will ever completely stop on this subject.
Do you have an emotional connection to Dealey Plaza, even though you weren't obviously alive at the time? When you visit, when you're inside this building, the Texas School Book Depository, here in the southeast corner of the first floor, does that mean something to you?
I certainly think there is a significance to me emotionally, and I say that not because because obviously I did not experience the news of the assassination. But I've heard from a number of people who were alive back then, not just the assassination witnesses, but people who just happened to be, going to work. It had a very, very big emotional impact on a lot of people. One in particular that really surprised me was there was a, I don't know how to describe his position, but Sid Davis. He was on the night of the assassination. He went to the White House lawn and was getting coverage of the casket being returned to the White House. And at the very end of his broadcast, you can hear him, and it's described in a few books, I believe. After the camera shut off, the cameraman and the press started crying. And that's not something that's usually talked about. But within Sid Davis's broadcast, within the last few seconds, you can hear his voice start to give out, I'd say.
Yeah.
And there is an impact on me when I hear that.
Circling back to Lancer, you present, probably I imagine, one of the youngest people ever to present at the Lancer conference, if not the youngest. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So what kind of a reaction? You're sitting there with veteran researchers who have maybe studied this subject 20, 30, 40 years in the audience. How do they respond to you? What kind of feedback did you get?
They were surprisingly supportive. The main response was, I'd say, people were just very appreciative that I was there, and I had at least a mild interest in the case. A lot of people came up to me and said that they learned something that they didn't know before, which was my goal in the presentation. I actually, something that surprised me is I presented in front of Robert Groden, and he came up to me afterwards and said that he didn't know something in there that I taught him, and that was very surprising to me, I'd say.
I bet that meant a lot to you, hearing that from Robert.
Yeah.
Brown. That's great.
And I've talked with him in person quite a bit now. I'm close friends with him. I've been able to see some of the things he has in his personal collection, and it's just unbelievable what he has.
So when do you think you'll finish your book?
That I can't exactly say right now. I've had a lot of delays, and the main issue I'm facing is that there's not enough information out there to actually say definitively about a lot of stuff. Like you mentioned earlier, the Tullius set. There doesn't exist enough information about that for me to write my chapter about it. So until the information is released, I don't want to release my book.
We collect these oral histories, we put them on our database. We hope that students, teachers, researchers, historians, they're accessible all over the world, and we hope people make use of them. Speaking to that audience, people perhaps one day even younger than you, what words of wisdom would you like to share with people as far as interest in the Kennedy assassination, where you hope they'll be when they watch this recording, what you hope they'll do, that sort of thing? What would you say to those folks?
The main thing I want people, especially younger researchers, to understand is never take anything at face value. That's a very, very big lesson to learn, especially in this research, because there's always something behind something else.
The besides Pictures of the Pain and your own book, what other books would you recommend young people read if they want to be interested in this subject?
A lot of Robert Groden's books, I'd say, JFK Absolute Proof, and the first book I bought of his was The Killing of a President, which was one of the first books I got on the assassination. But there's certainly quite a few books about the assassination that are very useful resources. I know Bart Camp recently came out with a good book on Prayer Man. That's a good resource, not really for people starting out on their research, but if you'd like to go deeper with the research, especially into Lee Harvey Oswald and the Texas School Book Depository, I'd say that's a very good book for that kind of research.
Since you mentioned Prayer Man, for folks watching the recording, of course, the figure in the doorway that appears in the Jimmy Darnell film, who some researchers believe is Lee Harvey Oswald, there right after the assassination. How do you feel about that theory?
I personally don't believe it was Lee Harvey Oswald. I believe at the time of the shooting, I personally believe that Oswald was in the doorway, but I don't believe he was outside. I think he was in the vestibule area, which is not seen, can't be clearly seen in any film that we have. As to who it was, I can't entirely be sure right now.
Why do you think Oswald was in that area?
That's just pure speculation. But I've seen a lot of people say that before, and I don't believe Oswald, because when the police officer found him on the second floor, I don't believe he was sitting down. He was going to grab a Coke, correct? And I think that indicates that he possibly wants the motorcade and possibly decided to, grab something to eat and then get back to work. As to why he didn't get back to work, I'd say when the police officer confronted him, I'd say he picked up on there's something clearly off, I'd say. And judging by his actions after leaving the book depository, I'd certainly say that he seemed very confused to me. He didn't understand fully what was going on. I don't think he ever did.
If you could interview one photographer who obviously is probably not around today, but if you could pick out any one single photographer to interview from November 22nd, who do you think that would be?
That's a good question. I'd have to go with personally I'd do Orville Nix, because his film is very unique, I'd say. And unique not in the fact that it caught the assassination, but he was one of maybe two people that witnessed the assassination and the next morning went back and filmed from where he had filmed to try and remember what he had filmed. And that is, I don't know of a single other photographer that did that. And I'd say, from what he's told other researchers, he had a very unique experience that day, I'd say.
have I not asked you about that you want to tell me?
Well, there's certainly a lot of cameramen, photographers that I'm discovering even now that either people aren't too interested in their photos or no one even knew they existed. I talked with a student last year named, and I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but Albert Valtierra. He was a student that went to Crozier Tech, and he was a student in the photography class, and he took a 4x5 press camera with him to watch the motorcade and took a single photo of the motorcade going by. Now what's unfortunate about his photo is he only has the print of his photo, and because the photography teacher kept the negative. And I'm not exactly sure where the negative is now. But relating to him, his story is very interesting because he was actually developing his photo when he heard of the assassination. And that's very interesting. And I do have a copy of that photo somewhere, if you'd like to see it afterwards. But yeah, I talked to him over the phone, and I haven't had the chance to do an in-person interview with him yet. But because he has Mexican heritage, he spends a lot of his time advocating for that community. He just recently retired as, I believe, the head of a rather large society I can't remember the name of, relating to Mexican heritage.
Anything else you want to share? Or anything you can think of that I haven't asked about?
I'd say some of the work I'm doing specifically that you especially don't see anymore is I don't like to do any work on digital. I do not like to. I like to have a film copy of everything. I like to do all of my work with film copies. And fortunately, I'm able to do that a lot more now because I have access to things like that. But unfortunately, that's something that you just don't see nowadays. And I personally believe that no digital scan will be better than the actual image contained on the film. It's just not possible with the technology we have. Because what you're doing is you're converting an image made up of microscopic specks of silver halide and trying to convey that as macroscopic pixels on a screen, and that you lose image quality quite a bit actually in that process. So my main goal is to do film enhancements of films that haven't had film enhancements done before, like blow-ups and certain things to enhance the film. And for example, I want to get a hold of John Martin Jr.'s original film because his film is severely underexposed. And the only person that's ever done any work with that was Robert Groden, who lightened up 8 Stops. I personally believe I could do better.
Well, I suspect we'll be hearing a lot more from you. I'm sure you hear about a lot, actually. When your book comes out, certainly I'd love to have you back, and we can talk a little bit further, and we can just revisit this subject in 5 or 10 years. If you're still interested in the Kennedy assassination, we'll talk about where you are then and what you've been doing.
Of course.
I appreciate you reaching out. It's always exciting when someone, especially someone young like yourself, volunteers to share their story and be part of this collection here at the museum. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you very much for having me.